Morning. First of all, I appreciate everybody being here today. It's not night yet. Now, I'm apologizing already because, like Ross was saying, the crud's going around. Well, it doesn't seem to have missed me yet. I mean, it hasn't missed me. So if my words are stumbling around and they're not quite coherent, it's not completely my fault. I've got quite a bit of Mucinex in me and some Advil to kind of be up here. So I'm just apologizing now for any thing that I might say that's inappropriate. I'll try not to be like Rob. Today, it's that time of year though, isn't it? It's that time of year that we start spending quite a bit of time looking back of what's happened in our lives, assessing different areas of our life, don't we? We have a tendency to do that this time of year. How did the year go? One of the things, even on the dairy, we have the financial, the guy that helps me with the finances, he sends out a questionnaire and he's asking you about what happened this year and where you're at right now and where you're wanting to go, right? That's kind of one of the things that we end up doing. And then we do things like, well, after we've assessed that, and usually, I don't know how you do it necessarily. Is it out of emotions? Because, emotionally, I look in the mirror and I see what Christmas has done to my body. I've grown in places that it shouldn't have grown, but it did. So we start to do things from an emotional standpoint too, don't we? So one of the things I got to thinking about, and really what I wanted to talk about is I think sometimes we spend a lot of time assessing different areas of our lives. How often do we assess where we're at spiritually? Where are we at and where are we going? So, in the thought of that, I want you, as we're going through this message, to be individually. When I started to prepare for this message, I thought, well, I needed to talk about the condition of man. I needed to talk about where man's condition is, and part of that is so that I could recognize my own condition. Where am I at? What am I, how am I spiritually? And I'm trying to get you to think along these lines, and as we move through this sermon, I want you to keep that always in the back of your mind. Where am I at in the past? Where am I at now, and where do I want to go? And I think sometimes that's some of the things that as we're assessing where we're going. And like I said, I think we do that in a lot of areas of our life. I do it on the dairy and finances, and I do it like I talked about when I look in the mirror and I know I have to do something with getting into being being more healthy after all the Christmas cookies that I've eaten. There's all those things that we do, and we're assessing that, aren't we? So I want you today, as we're going through this, to always keep that in the back of your mind. Hopefully that you're assessing where you're at spiritually, where you're at, where you've been, and where you're going. That's the point of this. So I started doing all this work of preparing for this. I thought, well, just like I said, we need to spend some time in Genesis. Because, Genesis really talks to us. The first 11 chapters of Genesis God tells us how the creation of the world happened, that he made it. But the third chapter tells us that it didn't take us very long to mess it up. And so I spent a lot of time in there the last few days, and I was going to spend time in that. Well, Jennifer ended up, I'm encouraging you, if you don't have one of these, she bought it at Crow, and she got one online for me that's coming, but it's called the Jesus Bible. What was really interesting about it is I think a lot of the commentary and a lot of the things it's trying to, from the Old Testament, and I believe this. I believe that the Bible is God's story, and that we can be a part of that story. And so what this kind of does is it has a tendency to even in the Old Testament, to foreshadow us back to Jesus. Because in reality, if you're looking hard enough, Jesus is from the beginning of this book to the end of this book. And so that's why we ended up spending some time here. Well, she did something after a couple days of hard study, trying to figure out what I was going to do. She read a article in here, and it's by Louis Giglio. I think some of you will probably recognize him from K-Love, some of those kinds of things. So, and we read that, and it really had to say a lot. It spoke to me from the perspective of, it's what I wanted to say. Louis beat me to it. So I asked Jennifer after we read this, so I had to get permission. Is that okay just to read that article to the church? She thought about it a second. She says, yeah, you can do that. So just know I got permission before I did it. Okay. So that's what we're going to do. But again, keep in mind, the purpose is be thinking in your mind also. Be answering that question of, where have I been? Where am I at? And where am I going spiritually as I read this? Okay. It's lengthy, so I'm warning you now. And if I start coughing, somebody else might have to end up coming up and reading this for me. And if you're ever looking for this in this Bible, it's on page 24, and it's titled Revolt. Something is wrong with humanity. While we might try to put on our best face for the world, evil lurks deep inside us all. To deny this reality is to close your eyes to history, for the checkered past of mankind is a monument to the fallen nature we all bear. Should we ever think otherwise, we need only to visit the gas chambers of Auschwitz, where haunted walls recount unspeakable murderous acts. The Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, where blacks were brutalized because of the color of their skin. The jungle of the Congo, where child soldiers were forced to maim or kill their families. Or the brothels of Delhi, where innocent girls are bought and sold to appease twisted cravings. A brief stop in any of these places should jar us back to grim reality again. We are capable of committing outrageous wrongs. Those sins, both the ones we act at and those we harbor in our thoughts, are equal in the eyes of God. So it was in the beginning, starting with Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. Since that time, humankind's capacity to rebel against God has not diminished. We are born with propensity to go our own way. The first humans arrived on earth with choice, the free will to follow God towards abundant life or to do things their own way and come face to face with death. Adam and Eve chose death, and we all bear the consequences of their fall. Romans 5:12. How easy it is for us to condemn the first couple for their derelict behavior. God himself walked with them in the cool of the day, and everything about their world was perfect. They were naked yet unashamed, free from sickness, weariness, brokenness, pain, and death. Before them were trees of every kind, gifts of God for their enjoyment. Adam and Eve's purpose was to manage and care for the plants and creatures on the earth. Their very being was fashioned in the image of God. Among the trees of the garden, God placed the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the center. He instructed Adam to steer clear of the fruit of the latter, lest he die. One tree to avoid versus countless trees to enjoy, all set in paradise. An easy choice, right? However, another voice, the voice of a serpent, personifying Satan himself, enters God's story and blurred the lines between good and evil. Satan, like humankind at one time, also had a choice. He could have worshiped God in the company of the angels or revolted. Foolish Satan chose his own glory and was jolted from heaven like a falling star. In Satan's rebellion, God granted him limited freedom on earth. With that freedom, he sold a lie to Adam and Eve, convincing them that God was trying to rob them of a greater joy by keeping them from the one tree. The serpent called God's trustworthiness into question, undermining God's character and goodwill towards his creation. Adam and Eve took the bait and turned their backs on God, reaching for the heights of a godlike status, yet falling to the depths of futility, rebellion, and death. Immediately, paradise was shattered into a billion tiny pieces. Guilt ended innocence. The couple hid from the presence of God. Judgment fell. Death entered the scene. Adam and Eve's perfectly harmonious tenure in the Garden of Eden was over. What happened in the garden is called sin, but there's no way to characterize it than using the word revolt. Humankind said on that day that we will still say every day, I will do it my way. It's hard to imagine anyone spitting in the face of a friend, tracking a mud through the home of a neighbor on a rainy day, cutting off a funeral procession in traffic, or mocking a person with a disability. Common human decency causes us to recoil at the thought, yet we casually ignore the Almighty, rebuke his counsel, laugh at his wisdom, pursue our own pleasures, and straightaway say no when he calls us to his path and plan. If the word revolt sounds too strong, consider that God is the originator and owner of us all. Yet we attempt to dismiss and belittle the one who formed us from that dust. We spit in God's face and slam the door on his love, often without a thought or even a twinge of regret. We treat God worse than we treat most of our friends and neighbors. We repeatedly say towards heaven, no thanks, I'm doing just fine without you. God has graciously invited us into his story, breathed into us the very breath that gives us life, and invited us to know and walk with him. To do less, to choose less, is to shove our will in the face of the Almighty. And every time we do, we turn his best for us upside down. In God's eyes, all people are in the same predicament. That's when Scripture indicates, when the New Testament writer Paul says, all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, Romans 3:23. The prophet Isaiah amplifies our plight when he wrote, "We all like sheep have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way." Isaiah 53:6. The psalmist writes, "All have turned away, all have been corrupt. There is no one who does good, not even one." Psalms 14:3. Like Adam and Eve, we seek to elevate ourselves to God's status, free ourselves from his authority, and define for ourselves what is wrong and what is right. Comparing our behavior against someone else is an attempt to make ourselves look more desirable does us no good. Revolt has never been about a magnitude of our sin, but the fact that we are willing to look into the face of God, face of a good and loving God, and turn and run the other way. Left to ourselves, we will do what Adam and Eve did in the garden. We exchange the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like mortal human beings. Romans 1:23. God promised life and sought to protect people from destruction and death. The serpent twisted God's words, and the world around us does the same. We often discard what is best for us from God's perspective for what is easiest. We ditch what is good for what is convenient. Our culture scoffs at what is innocent and pure while it celebrates what is perverse and immoral. More and more, honesty, decency, and modesty are marginalized and even vilified. This exchange of truth for lies does not happen without consequence. Once jettisoned from Eden, humankind did not cease to worship. We were created to do. Humans just exchanged the true worship of holy God for something else. Scripture says they exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshiped and served created things rather than the Creator. Romans 1:25. When we turn our God-intended worship towards a person or a pleasure or a thing, we break ranks with God and violate the first of his 10 commandments. Exodus 23. Sin shatters God's perfect plan for us and leaves us with powerless idols that soak up our affections while returning nothing of a spiritual benefit to our lives. But that's not all. It gets worse. As we see in Eden, a holy, righteous, and just God cannot turn a blind eye towards our revolt. He cannot simply wink and magically make it disappear. While we rationalize away our sin, God cannot deny his own character. Our sin derailed our worship, separated us from God, introduced us to a hardship and toil, but hostility between us and others, filled our hearts with selfish intentions, brought pain in childbirth, and spawned a global epidemic of hatred and war and injustice that marches on full force today. Even creation itself was rocked by humankind's sinful revolt. Natural disasters continue to mar our world, and nothing in creation on this earth is as it was meant to be. Romans 8:19-22. Everything has been broken because of sin. Decay and death now mark every inch of human existence. Families fracture, marriages fail, litigation flurries, deception darkens, addictions crush, complacency numbs, violence escalates, insanity imprisons, pleasures disappoint, riches disappear, prejudice blind, insecurities mar, jealousy rots, power corrupts. Yet our sin does something more. Our revolt places in the crosshairs of God's wrath, his righteous indignation that is set on eradicating all wrong from the face of the earth. While God's wrath gets a bad rap, any of us, if we thought it through, would act in the same way. We want the weight of justice to fall on those who abuse and injure us or others. In the same way, yet on such a grander scale, God's wrath will fall on every rebel heart. Humankind is without excuse, guilty before holy God and deserving of eternal punishment. Revolt didn't simply make us bad. It left us spiritually dead. Romans 6:23. But fortunately, this is God's story and not ours. The story does not end in death. Rather, the seeds of salvation are sown in Eden's soil. The God of mercy trumped revolt with redemption in an outrageous plan to buy back the rebels at the cost of his one and only Son. While judgment rained down on Adam and Eve, and the earth and the serpent's grace was on the horizon, the first sign of grace was God's banishment of Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden. In this act of kindness, he prevented those he loved from eating from the tree of life, thus saving them from the living forever in their state of death. Outside Eden is a heavenly mission. Outside Eden, a heavenly mission can ensue, one foreshadowed as God made coverings for the man and the woman. Once sin smashed Eden's innocence, Adam and Eve were filled with shame. No one told them to be ashamed, as if guilt is a human-induced effect meant to give control of the people to religious higher-ups. Adam and Eve were convinced on their own that something was amiss. Their conscience shouted, "Run and hide," as the Spirit of God brought conviction to their hearts. Though God judged their actions, his mercy intervened to cover their shame. Using fig leaves from a nearby tree, Adam and Eve tried to hide their nakedness. But God went a step further by clothing them with animal skins. This picture of the sacrifice of the one who would ultimately shed his blood so that all people could have an opportunity to be saved. This kind of grace is staggering, especially in the light of the fact that there's no record of so much as "I'm a sorry" from Adam and Eve. Once their deed was exposed, Adam danced the dance. We often dance as well, passing the blame to Eve in a weak attempt to deflect God's attention from his disobedience and the responsibility only he himself bore. One would think Adam would have quickly blurted out, "Please forgive me, God. I'm a fool and I cannot believe what I've done." But Adam couldn't bring himself to confess, so he blamed someone else. Yet God's redemption plan was undeterred. Not only did he make a covering for their nakedness, but God also promised that a descendant of Adam and Eve would one day crush the serpent's head, though he would be harmed in the process. Genesis 3:15. This promise and plan, while far from clear in Genesis 3, would define the story that unfolds in the rest of the Bible. God fulfilled his promise by seeing to it that Jesus Christ, a descendant of the woman, would crush Satan, sin, and death forever. God wasn't going to turn his back on those who were made to bear his image in the world. While mankind chose their own way, Jesus yielded to the Father's plan, taking on flesh. Jesus was tempted like every other human, yet Jesus did not sin. Jesus exchanged his life for every rebel who turns on him to accept the price he paid for their sin and trusted in him for salvation. The final sacrifice for sin was made as Jesus took our blows, carried our sin, bore our shame, and was crushed by the wrath of God in our place. In the process, God made him who had no sin to be sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. 2 Corinthians 5:21. Rebels could now be forgiven. Sinners could be made clean, and those who drifted far from their heavenly Father could come home again. The key to this brand new revolt is our willingness to end the revolt, to be forgiven. We must admit our sins. To say that we have no sin is to make God a liar and to seal our fate. 1 John 1:10. But to admit our wrongs and to raise the white flag of surrender is to truly find freedom and enjoy life in God's presence that will never end. Like I said, I didn't think I could even come close to coming up with the words that were spoken there. And I think it's, okay. We're almost done because I figured that was probably enough. But I encourage you to try to find that. It's called the Jesus Bible. I think this one actually came from Crow's here in town. So if you want to pick it up. But I encourage you to pick that up. And because I think it's amazing for me to think that the Bible is God's story. And as I'm assessing, like I said, I want you to, we should be doing that periodically anyway. We need to assess where we're at spiritually. We need to be assessing, we probably need to come to the realization that we've all sinned. We've all fallen short. And you're not going to be good enough. And that's probably, I guess this is time for an invitation. Some of us have ended the revolt and probably given our lives back to Him. And I'm still in the process of giving all parts of myself back to Him. I'm finding sometimes there's places that I haven't completely surrendered my life. I easily want to do things on my own accord and do it my way. And I think that's, as we're assessing, that's why I've asked you to, sometimes I think we need to assess first our spiritual life. Because when we get that right, I think the rest of those different things that we're assessing, our physical well-being, our finances, our goals for work, our goals for life, our goals for our finances. When we get our spiritual lives right with God, those other things easily come back into the places where they should be. Now, I'm not saying all of a sudden that means life is going to be always hunky-dory and there's not going to be things that are going on that are hard. But when we get our spiritual lives, probably the rest of it doesn't matter that much. I look about all the time and the energy that I put in to being sure that the dairy is operating well and everything's right and the way it's supposed to be. But there's many times I've been in that I find myself that I've spent more time thinking about what I'm going to do instead of what the creator of this world that knew exactly how that was going to happen down there and how things that I was going to do that for a living, how much of that I've actually offered to Him is, if I'm honest, I probably have not done a very good job of that because He already knows how everything works. And we have a tendency to always, at least I have a tendency to always think, I know best. So, Ross, you want to close us out?